Hi, I'm John Whaite, winner of the Great British Bake Off, and I'm really excited about my first book, John Whaite Bakes. And from that, here's an exclusive recipe just for you. This is my recipe for Portuguese custard tarts, orange natas. Natas are a custard tart, but a tiny one, and it's made with puff pastry rolled in icing sugar. So it's really sweet, really flaky, and then you've got that burnt custard. Now it starts off with a rough puff pastry, which is dead simple to make, believe it or not. All you need to do is get some flour, put that into a bowl with some salted butter. So just rub the butter into the flour. Now you don't want to rub all the butter in, you need buttery rubble, so you need big chunks of butter like this, because what these do is these melt, and that creates steam which opens the layers apart in the puff pastry and hence gives you that nice puff. So when you've got to that stage, you need to add the water. Now it's not just water, it's water with about a teaspoon of lemon juice. And what the acid does in the lemon juice is it just cuts through the gluten. Because you do need to manipulate this slightly, and because of all the turning and rolling with the rough puff pastry, there is a danger of building up too much gluten in it being really rubbery. So if you put a bit of lemon juice in the water, that just cuts through any gluten formation. Now add about 2/3 of the water at first, and you have to get your hands dirty for this, but that's the fun part. Rub it through, and you're looking for a bit of a scraggy ball of pastry with this. It's not a neat, pretty thing at all, but it will be in the end. Just going to tip it out onto the surface. And like you would if you were making a scone, just gently fold and push it. You don't need it. And when it comes together into a scraggy ball like that, it's time to do the rolling and folding. I was once told by a chef that if you wash your hands when you're making pastry, it can really affect the dough. So the best thing to do is just put flour on and rub the butter off. Then flour the surface. Not too much flour, but you need a substantial covering. You don't want it to stick. You need to form the dough into a very, very rough square. And then with a floured rolling pin, squash it down slightly. Make sure it's really well floured underneath. And roll it into a long oblong. So keep flouring underneath the pastry. You're not meant to add too much, but you can always brush it off. It's better than your dough sticking. So this is called a book fold. So imagine the dough is in half that way. Fold the top half over to the centre and the bottom half up to meet it. Brush it off and then fold it like a book. And you can see that starts to create a much neater shape, and it makes the dough a lot smoother as well. And make sure you turn it and roll it against the seam that you've just created as well. Top down to the middle, bottom up to the middle, and fold it like a book. Now because you've manipulated this twice, it's going to need to rest in the fridge for at least 20 minutes. So I like to pop it in paper so it doesn't go too greasy. Put it in the fridge and then repeat the fold and turn twice more. So the rough puff pastry is chilling in the fridge. Now it's time to make the creme pâtissière. And again, this couldn't be simpler. Starts off with 4 egg yolks, 125 grams of golden caster sugar. Again, I only use golden because I like the toffee tones to it. You can use white caster sugar if you prefer. You need to whisk the egg yolks and sugar until light and fluffy and until the sugar's dissolved in the egg yolks. Otherwise the sugar can burn the egg yolks and leave little yellow specks in the creme pâtissière. You can burn off all the calories before you even eat it. Okay, so when you've got the egg yolks and sugar nice and foamy and pale, you add 40 grams of corn flour. And this will thicken the creme pâtissière so it's really, really gloopy and beautiful. Make sure you scrape all the sides as well, because if you leave clumps of corn flour on the sides and don't incorporate it, when you add the milk it'll go really, really sticky and quite nasty. So here I've got 500 ml of milk and 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and they've just come to just before the boil, so nice and hot. And we're going to temper this, so you add half of this into the egg yolks and then whisk it into a frenzy. So pour it on top, just half of it, and then whisk it in. You've got to act quite quickly here because you don't want to scramble the eggs. So really whisk it together well. And this goes back into the pan and back onto the heat. Make sure you get every last bit. So when this is back on the heat, you need to make sure that you keep whisking it constantly, both in the middle and around the outsides as well. A good indication of when it's going to be ready are these little bubbles on top that slowly die away, and that's when you know it is getting thicker and thicker. So this is getting thick because the whisk is leaving a trail on the top of the custard, but you still need to keep whisking it because you need this really, really thick. So once it's thickened, you take it off the heat, but you keep whisking it until it's cooled down, because otherwise the pan could still scramble the eggs at the bottom. We're there, perfect. That's a beautiful creme pâtissière. So to test that it's done, the best way to do it is take a wooden spoon, give it a quick stir, and if it really coats the back of the spoon well and hardly drips off, you've got a perfect creme pâtissière. Now what I like to do is enrich this with 40 grams of butter and mix that in until it's melted. So you need to get this cold, completely cold. The best way to do it, I find, is to put it into a big baking tray, and that spreads out the surface area and gets it cooler quicker. So spread that out on the tray. Now you've got to cover this with cling film immediately, and I mean right to the surface as well. Otherwise a nasty skin will form on it, and it'll be really difficult to get that skin off when you want it to be really smooth and silky. And this goes into the fridge for about 10 to 20 minutes or until completely cold. So I've got the creme pâtissière out of the fridge. It's completely cold now. This is a full quantity, but we only need half of the orange natas. So you can put the other half into a sealable bag and it'll keep in the fridge for at least a week. So you don't need to waste it. So we're going to do what's called knocking back the creme pâtissière. Sounds scientific, but it's not. Whisk it really, really well. Then to this we're going to add some orange liqueur and some orange zest. If you don't like orange, you can leave this out and just have plain natas, that's absolutely fine. But I like a bit of a boozy kick. So to make life easier, I put the creme pâtissière into a piping bag, and that makes it easier to put into the natas shells. So now it's time to roll out the pastry and cut out the natas shells. So the pastry is really chilled, the creme pâtissière is in its bag, and we're going to roll this out. Now instead of using flour though, we're going to use ice and sugar. And what that does is it crystallises as it cooks, so you've got a gorgeous caramelised pastry. Oh, these are good. Sprinkle a real liberal amount on here. Now, you don't want too much flour, but you want a lot of ice and sugar. And I mean a lot. Then roll out the pastry as normal. Now you try to get it as thin as you can. It doesn't have to be wafer thin, but the thinner the better. And also put some ice and sugar on the pastry as well on top, because you really want that caramelised, charred, burnished, gorgeous, gorgeous pastry. Still keep the pastry moving, you don't want it to stick to the counter. And pop a bit more ice and sugar underneath, and a bit more on top. Okay, so when it's about 3 millimeters thick, that's about right. So, with a circle cookie cutter, cut out. Now this recipe makes 24, I'm just going to make 12 here. So when you're going to make the next 12, don't just scrunch the pastry up into a ball because you'll break all those layers. The best thing to do with puff or rough puff pastry is just to layer it back on top of itself, fold it together, and then roll from that. So now you need to grease this shallow 12-hole bunting. You need to grease it really well because the sugar is going to caramelise and crystallise. It will have a tendency to stick, so make sure you grease it really well with lots of butter, and that also adds to the flavour. Butter and sugar. Oof. Okay, so that's greased. Now to layer these cut out pieces of pastry into the tin. And now to fill those with the creme pâtissière. So with the piping bag, just cut off the end. Now don't fill these more than half full. The creme pâtissière, because it's got egg in it, will expand and go over the tops of the custard tarts. So make sure you don't go over half full. Otherwise your oven floor will be full of creme pâtissière. So now for the oven. Okay, so these are perfectly baked. They've swollen up, burnished, and then sunk back down, and that's perfect for a Portuguese custard tart. So just prise them from the tin. Quite tricky because of all that sugar, but just get right under the pastry and oh, you can hear the flakes. Now that really is the sound of success and a good rough puff. So here we have 12 perfect natas, and I can't wait to eat every single one.